We were going to be the special landing force, helicopter assault, the surprise unit, the one that the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong had no idea where we were going to be ever. And so being on this ship going up and down the I-Corps area, we could be called at a moment's notice to start getting ready to go in to help another unit that was in trouble. So, or to become a blocking force. You got 3 battalions moving from all the bases and trying to kind of block it and find all the enemy. And then they would have us come in and be a blocking force, or they would be the blocking force, and we would sweep towards them, trying to get into battles with the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong. And so my first experience of Vietnam was they screwed up the landing, put us miles from where we were supposed to be, and we had to walk in the most atrocious heat and humidity you can't even imagine. And we ran into water problems right off the bat. It was April 67 when we made the attack, the end of April, and the beginning of May is when it ended. And we did kill a lot, but if it wasn't for our fire superiority, I mean, we never could have, we never could have beat them. I mean, they were stealthy, they were fast, there were large numbers, they were accurate. They had been there. We were like, this is our first combat experience for most of us.
I want to pull a few things together. You mentioned you're with the Special Landing Force. When you're on a ship, you're cruising off the coast of I-Corps. And as you describe in your memoir, I mean, you experienced combat throughout I-Corps, south of Da Nang, up on the DMZ, etc. You just used the phrase, battle after battle after battle. And then, a minute or so before that, you said we did a lot of killing. And so, what I'm hoping is, in this discussion, we can kind of walk through some things, obviously touching on very little of what you actually experienced. In your memoir, you mentioned a lot of you give the names of the operations that you were involved in. Operation Buffalo might be the best known of all those in relation to Can Tien. But do you have a count of how many battles you were in, or how many firefights you were in? Do you have a rough number? How many firefights, battles you experienced in a 13-month period?
So in a 13-month period, we were in 27 operations, 2 of which we won the Presidential Unit Citation, which is, they only give them to certain major battles, and like the Battle of Iwo Jima or D-Day. Right. They give Presidential Unit Citations for these huge battles, and we were in a couple of incredible battles. Union and Beaver Cage was one of them. And, we were in Operation Buffalo, but they were calling in other battalions from, the North. The North they were totally ingrained all through the DMZ and all of the I-Corps, the DMZ area, all around Can Tien and Jilin, they were so heavy in there.
You said on your first landing, you expected combat, but didn't actually experience it the first time. Now there is a lot of combat to come for you over the next 13 months, including a major fight right near the end of your tour. What was your first experience of combat?
It was on Operation Beaver Cage at first. I remember walking, and we were spread out, sweeping, looking for the enemy, sweeping towards the other battalions in the Quezon Valley. And I remember when the AK-47s opened up on us, and I was in kind of a jungle terrain at that moment. There was just happened to be in that terrain. And I mean, everybody ducked for cover. And the first thing we did was open up, we just fired as many bullets as we could in front of us towards the enemy to let them know that we're there and we're trying to gain fire superiority. And then that was just a stalling. We didn't know, we just thought they were trying to kill somebody. That was just a stalling tactic. And they were trying to slow us down so they could, set things up for the way we were sweeping. And then we swept a little further. And that's when I remember hearing the bloop, 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 hearing the bloop sound.
Mhm.
And, I never had
Mortars.
heard it. Yeah, never had heard it before. And the old salts that had some combat experience were yelling, hit the deck, hit the deck. And we were, the new guys, all of us are looking around like, what for? And then all of a sudden they went over our heads. And then they exploded, and then bam, we hit the ground. Well, those two experiences that was what you need. You need that, but the adrenaline is flowing like you can't. And then you can hear them walking the mortars in on you, getting closer and closer. And of course, you can't get up. What are you going to do? And of course, then they set up our mortar teams and hit the suspected areas, and then they stopped. And then we swept over that area, and they were gone. So it's like another delaying tactic.
Yeah. When you say I'm interested in what you just said, that we needed this experience. How old were you when you arrived in Vietnam?
So in Okinawa, I turned 19.
So you're 19 years old. When you say we needed this experience, do you mean that we need, this was the wake-up call that I'm not a 19-year-old kid anymore, and it really, with 19-year-old kid concerns, I'm a U.S. Marine in a place where people are trying to kill me, and you'd better wake up real fast.
With the AK-47, that is definitely the feeling that I had. When the mortars came in, it was more like, now I know what a mortar sounds like, and if I ever hear it again, I'll hit the ground. Now I'm getting educated. So the first was the education, what you said. The second was learning now how to stay alive, how to hit the ground fast. Keep your eyes always on the ground. We'll keep looking all the time.
You mentioned the AK-47, a famously good piece of weaponry. You were among the first U.S. Marines to swap out the M14 for the M16.
We were the very first to have it.
The very first to have it.
Very first unit.
And so I'm assuming, from everything I've heard from others who had to deal with this weapon when it first came out, really all through 67, going into 68, that unlike the AK-47, these first versions, these M16s that you got, were notoriously
jamming.
They were notorious for jamming. Was that your experience with the M16?
The M16, on one side, it was the best damn weapon you could possibly have. I remember when I first had it, it was so light, and the bullets, when they hit whatever it is, and then they start spinning, they create a lot of damage. And you wouldn't think that this projectile, because the projectile, it's a long 22, and it has a lot of power behind it. The problem is that there was high carbon powder that they used in there, and the high carbon, after a lot of rounds, would start to build up in there. Then also we found out that the chamber that it went into was made of an alloy that caused the jamming. So we had a double whammy hit us. We didn't know we had a problem until we started getting into some pretty heavy firefights, and then they started jamming. And I remember the first time mine jammed, and it is the most horrible feeling in the world. You go from a power position to bayonet. And they have AK-47s, you could throw it in the mud. See, our old M14s were spectacular. You could throw that in the mud just like an AK-47, and you could pull it out of the mud and start shooting. It would fire. The M16, and then when it first started happening, we started complaining about it, and they go, "Well, clean your weapons, clean your weapons," and so we clean our weapons, and it still happened. It's going like that was their excuse when they jammed. Well, you got to keep your weapon clean, and it's like it was clean.
How are you supposed to do that? Whenever I hear that, I'm mystified. I mean, how? Yeah, I mean, if you're hanging out at an LZ, I understand that, but how in the world are you supposed to keep this thing clean when you've got dust and mud and everywhere you're out in the boonies?
Everywhere you go,
Especially if you're in fights. I don't understand. That's mystifying. You share a story. I think it comes near the end of your 13-month tour. If I have it right, your M16 jams, and a battle's raging all around you. You get it unjammed, shoot, maybe get one bullet off, jams again. If I have this right, and now you're stuck with, I think you've got a bullet in the chamber, if that's even going to work, and a bayonet and a grenade. That's what you're left with.
and a K-bar.
And right, and you've got your K-bar. I'm sure you're not keeping count of this, but do you have a guess in your 13 months how many times your M16 jammed on you when you're in a fight? Just guessing.
5, 6 times.
Yeah.
But they were all in battles. They're all in battles. There was one time they put us out in front of the lines, and we had it was like a patrol size. It was a squad of Marines, and it was my squad that went out in front, and we could hear the enemy walking in the grasses, like right next to us, in front of us, and we just, opened up full automatic. I put out 9 magazines as fast as I could. That's 20 rounds per, and all of a sudden, it's jamming. It's jamming, and it's like, what am I going to do? And then we pulled back. We didn't know if they were going to come at us or whatever, and we pulled back to our lines. And I got back to the lines, and there was an extra M16 in that area, and I took my M16 and just wrapped it around a tree. I was so mad because I can't use a weapon that's no good, and I didn't want to leave it. We didn't have another helicopter supply, and I certainly didn't want to carry that thing back we got enough weight. We got 50 pounds of weight carrying around out there, and all the food and provisions that you need for 3 days. And then we got resupplied every 3 days. So I just had another weapon, and by the end of my tour, I'd been through so many different weapons,
Well, I wanted to ask about that because I've heard different things. In some cases, in one case, an officer says, look, my guys, their M16s are jamming. The rule says we can't use AK-47s, and it makes sense because if you're fighting according to sounds, then there's a problem if Marines are using the weapon that has the sound of the enemy's weapon. But this officer decided that's better than them not being able to use any weapons at all because they're jamming. In other cases, an officer just holds the line and says, no, we're not going to use AK-47. I hear a Marine who says that he just sort of somehow gamed the system through his entire tour, where he held on to his M14 and never even, used an M16. I think you mentioned in what you've written, one guy was using a Swedish weapon.
AK.
I mean, were there, or was there a conversation about this among the Marines you worked with? Like, hey, let's just use the AK, or how did that? Do you remember these conversations about?
Absolutely. There was no doubt. You were not allowed to have an AK-47 in my unit. You were not allowed. You had to turn it in, and they had to send it back. At the end of my tour, I noticed that there were some guys that had an AK-47, but they were the sergeants and the the guys who were in charge. We as the little guys never ever could carry another weapon from another, and I don't know why, because I there was a lot of weapons that we ran across, and it would have been nice to have an AK as a backup, but or even a pistol if they just allowed me to have a pistol to protect myself when these things jam. But there's thousands of Marines that died because their weapons jammed. Thousands. Yeah.
Yeah, this is my last question on this topic. Combat, I mean, is so full of stress, and here I'm just speaking based on what I've heard. I've never experienced it, but it's so full of stress. Even, if you're fighting an enemy that abides by the rules of war, in your case, you're not. And with the Viet Cong, you've got all the traps and the constant ambushes. In addition to that, as you describe in what you've written, you've got the snakes and the insects and the intense heat, all of these incredible stressors coming down on 18, 19, 20-year-olds. And then the primary weapon that you have is not reliable. And I'm just wondering what additional psychological burden that added. And then you say, hey, this weapon doesn't work, and the response is, we'll just clean it. And the obvious response is, well, a lot of times that's not possible. And the enemy have a weapon they could bury in the mud for a month and it's going to work just fine. I mean, did that add an additional psychological burden to what you guys had to deal with? This sense that we've been handed a weapon we can't trust?
That's exactly. You never knew if you could trust your weapon. And in my case, I always got somebody else's weapon, somebody who was wounded or killed. I got their M16, and I'm going, so, I don't even know if it works, just clean it and go on and use it, as best you could. I remember they said, we're going back to Death Valley. And it was like, oh my God, not Death Valley, with the booby traps and the snipers and all that other stuff. You're going, duh. So then one time we're sitting in and the lieutenant was telling us, we're going to Happy Valley. And never heard of that. Where's that? And we found out that was Death Valley. They changed the name because it was affecting the psychological value of the Marines.
You had served in 27 named operations. Of those, is there one that, and I'm sure all of them bring powerful memories to, back to you. Is there, if I, let's just say for purposes of time, you can really just, speak about one, which of these 27 operations, for whatever reason, stands out most in your mind?
Well, there's 3 operations. Okay. Probably Cochise is probably the worst for me because I was trapped in a rice paddy, and every squad that came out to help us was annihilated, and we got down to 3 men. I'm sorry, 7 men out of 50 is what we're supposed to have. So there was only 7 men left. Not everybody died. There was a lot of wounded going out. And it was a well-set trap, and they opened fire on us when we were probably 40 yards from the tree line, and there had to be 20 to 30, maybe 40 of them just shooting at us. And how I was never hit on that first opening, I think it's because I was a peon. They always aimed for the leaders, and Jones was the leader, and Muller was the leader. And as we're walking to this tree line, I mean, when they opened up, they hit those guys right off the bat. Jones was killed immediately, and it shouldn't have happened, because later on I talked to our company commander, guy who was in charge, and he specifically told Lieutenant Francis not to move, just to stay. And he knew the direction we were traveling and that there was a tree line, and he wanted to secure that tree line before we went any further. Well, the captain had said not to move because there was ambushes all over the place, and he didn't want us to walk into an ambush. And he said, the captain told me, he said, to be honest with you, I thought that your entire platoon was dead, wounded, all of you. He said, I didn't know there was any survivors. And that was a very touching point at that time. I know that Francis was wounded and he ended up out of the field, and everybody was like either dead or wounded. And we had one guy that just totally flipped out. He was just terrified, shaking. He was a total mess. And by the way, when he came home, he died within a month in a horrible car accident.
Mm.
So a lot of that is the PTSD that's from probably that battle, because I never saw him again after that battle.
Wow. So Cochise is an especially memorable operation. You said that there were
and Buffalo,
Buffalo.
And so it would be Cochise, Buffalo, and Medina. Medina is when we were overrun, and I had enough knowledge to make sure I knew how to survive. And I knew they were out there, so I took all the grenades of the new guy and all my grenades and put them in my parapet and straightened out the cotter pins, because I knew they were coming, and it was very, very likely I was going to be throwing all these hand grenades. And as they started to come, I mean, you could tell they were coming, and they were opening fire. They were throwing grenades, and I threw at least 15 grenades. I don't know the exact count, but I always carried like 10. And that's a lot of weight. A hand grenade is pretty heavy.
Yeah.
I mean, and I always carried a lot of them. What do I put in my pack? And they kind of leave it up to us. And I go, well, do I want more food, or do I want more ammunition?
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to carry? Because we had small packs. We didn't have really big packs. The Army had the big, beautiful packs with the pockets and everything. We had the old packs from the Korean War. So I had to figure it out. And then in the beginning of my tour, I made sure I had enough food and then put the ammunition in. Mm-hmm. Well, towards the middle of my tour, I realized you put your ammunition in first, as much as you can carry, and then your food goes in, and what you don't take, you don't take. So, I learned you can't run out of ammunition. That is a horrible feeling, running out of ammunition.
Yeah.
So I used to carry in my pack, in the bottom of my pack, there were cardboard packets of 20 rounds. I had a lot of them in there in case I had to reload my magazines. So I always carried 2 bandoliers of, I remember when I first went out, I don't even think I had a bandolier. Mm-hmm. And then by the middle of my tour, I had 2 of them across my chest. And I didn't want to run out of ammunition. That's the bottom line. And you need it fast. You want to be grabbing for it, pulling it out. So yeah, you learn. And that's what happened. I started getting really good and started really learning how to survive. And then, I knew all the guys when I first started. And then as they started getting killed and wounded and no longer seeing them, new guys kept on coming. And so I got to know those new guys. But as I started going past my halfway tour, the names, I hardly remember the names. Just those guys in August that when we got wiped out, we got the new guys. It was almost like a whole new platoon. But then as they started getting wounded and killed, and the officers were gone, and for whatever reason, they get wounded and killed. And it just got so bad that I just didn't want to remember anybody's name anymore. It's just, you didn't want to get too close. And I got so close to Bill Burgoon he came in August after we got wiped out. He was one of the guys, and he was the greatest guy you have no idea. Probably one of the finest people I ever met in my life, and always joking, always concerned, a nice guy, and then he ends up dying. He was killed in January, and he got grenade shrapnel, and then he was in a position where they kept on shooting him. He ended up getting shot, and it's just he died. I didn't know he was out there. I didn't know. I heard someone moaning, but they were pretty far away, and my M16 jammed. So that always that guilt. Should I have done something? It will always haunt you, no matter what.
You mentioned Cochise, you mentioned Medina, and then what stands out most in your mind about Operation Buffalo up on the DMZ?
Well, we landed south of where all the battles were taking. Um, we got online and we noticed there was like the jets were sending in artillery, and the closer we got, they started putting artillery on us, and so they had mortars, they had artillery from on the other side of the DMZ, and they would pound us with they would pound us with all kinds of artillery. We always dug a hole, and luckily for us, it wasn't the type of soil where we couldn't dig into it. You could dig a fast hole if you wanted. It was dirt, good dirt, and you never dug a wide hole. You just dug a hole you could jump into somewhat, and then make sure that the top of your head was covered. So that saved my life. One of the rounds hit so close, and I don't know if it was a mortar round or artillery or what it was, but my pack was all right outside my hole, and it was full of shrapnel. And all I could think, if I was laying there, I would have been full of shrapnel. That would have been me. And I managed to jump in that hole. But while their rounds are landing for maybe 5 minutes or more, it seems like an hour. Because when you're in that situation, they're hitting and they're exploding. Some are close, some are far. It's like and you're laying there when it stops, and you don't want to come out of your hole. I mean, you just maybe they got to throw a stray round in on you and kill you. And so it is so terrifying. And then they told us at one point that we had to attack this tree line, and it was like, all I could think of is, oh, we're gonna all die. That's my thought was, we attack a tree line, even though they drop bombs on it and everything. I don't want to be the guy in an open field attacking someone who's in concealment. And that's what they were basically telling us we were going to do. And it was like, what is this, the Revolutionary War? I mean, why don't we just bomb the living hell out of them? Just keep dropping bombs on them.
Yeah.
Well, in July, what they had done was they had dug bunkers, underground bunkers, and all the bombing in the world wasn't going to do anything. And when they had done a sufficient, what they thought, bombing and napalm and stuff like that, they thought that it was okay to do that because there's not going to be many of them left. Well, we probably never even killed one of them. And we had 3 tanks when we finally did attack. I mean, they finally said, yeah, we're going to attack. And that's when Pike and Jones, great leaders, died. Not Jones, Pike and Malloy, Staff Sergeant Malloy. And they're just open fire like you can't even believe.
What are the key memories you have of this fight up on the DMZ, January 1968?
Well, so I didn't know that our platoon sergeant and the lieutenant were not very good. They were older. So when you're older and you have rank, you assume that they know what they're doing. And when they sent me as point man down toward where I knew that the enemy was all the time, I was very leery. And we got to a point where we had to cross a little ocean view, and it was dark, and they were going to have us cross this in like a file going across. And I remember that the sergeant had gone to talk to the lieutenant who was further down the line of the, a line that we were in the middle of the night. And I decided to take a recon across. And when I did the recon, went across and little ocean view, I figured one little stealthy person trying to get across just anything going on. As I crossed over there and I got to the other side, then I heard numerous people talking right where they were going to send us. And it was machine gun nest. And I killed everybody right then and there. So when I came back to tell them, and I couldn't throw grenades because I wanted to be stealthy. I left my pack, I left all my grenades, I left everything that was in my pockets back so I could be stealthy. And when I got back, I told them, I said, there are so many gooks over there. I mean, I heard at least like 5 of them talking in one hole. I said, and they were laughing and joking, and they don't know we're here. So we can't cross here. And he tried to make me still cross there. I mean, it's the stupidity of him. And I said, you could kill me. I don't care what you're going to do. I'm not crossing here. And then I gave him a suggestion. We go along and cross where the ocean was bringing in this cloud of moisture in the middle of the night, and all this moisture was coming. And I said, that's where we should cross, over by the ocean. And of course, I didn't know that they were lined up all in the ocean, on the ocean side, and I'm on the other side of this
Sand dune?
Mounds of sand dunes.
Mhm.
And I'm walking along and I'm looking for them because I know they're there. And every little spot I'm looking just didn't relate to me that there was someone there. And I'd see something, I'd see plastic or something, and go over to it. And I mean, I'm already full automatic and nothing. I'm walking. Well, they were just on the other side of the dune, and I didn't know that. And I guess they just wanted to be on the side where the ocean was, So that was the moments that were the scariest. And then when I kept on saying, this is terrible. We're in a horrible situation. I remember I came up, we had dropped off the 2 other squads, and the lieutenant didn't even come where he was supposed to. He went over by a Buddha that was in the middle of the sand dunes. He wasn't supposed to be there. He was supposed to be with us, setting up an ambush for the North Vietnamese, because that's the whole idea of this strategy, was for us to sneak up there in the middle of the night and then set up our ambushes, and then when they come down, then we could ambush them. But they were already there. And so I don't think that the sergeant believed me. I really don't think he believed me. And then when I came up to the dune that was in front of me, there was this huge dune. I remember looking at it, and it was just like a mountain dune. And there was a path that went right to the ocean, and a path that went left that was the way he wanted us to go. And I looked down on the ground and I saw pure white sand. And it was maybe 2 feet wide. And I remember being in my, it was the summer after I graduated from high school. I lived by Rainbow Beach in Chicagoland. And I used to work for the Chicago Tribune, and I'd get off at about 3 a.m. And what I do is I just go out to the lake. Well, all the moisture from the lake had settled on the sand, and it was like a brown sand. But when you'd walk on it, you could see footsteps of the white sand underneath. And I noticed this white sand, and I could say to myself, geez, there's white sand underneath. Well, here I'm in this situation now, and I see white sand this far, and I'm pointing it out to the sergeant that we're going to death. We're walking down right where, and it had to be within the last hour. This a long line of the enemy had just set in, and he was going to put me in cowardice in the face of the enemy and put me in the back of the squad. And I said, there's no way I'm going to the back of the squad. I don't want to run into an ambush. So I just started walking and just so like, I mean, it's so tense. Yeah, you're asking about the battle. This is one of the tensest moments. And then when I saw this little piece of plastic laying, that's the way our guys would put plastic. They had like white, it wasn't white, it was clear plastic, and it was actually curved. It was like positioned. And I had my M16 on full automatic, and I just went like going right into the hole. And that's when the Vietnamese guy popped his head and said, I don't talk, you know, he was talking to me. And I mean, pulled the trigger. I mean, and there was another guy in the hole, and I just sprayed that hole with all 20 rounds. And then I yelled ambush right, and then I put in another magazine, and we all got down. Nobody did anything. The enemy didn't do anything. All our guys didn't do anything. That's when the Chi-Com grenades started coming out from our right. And that's when the battle began. And that's when Bill got hit with the one hit him and caused him to start bleeding. And when I'm yelling, you know, I'm screaming at the sergeant, you know, he's using vulgarity, telling him, I told you they were here. I told you they were here. And he goes, I go, what do we do? He says, pull back, pull back. So that's when I started telling everybody to pull back. And then, you know, that was the most horrifying. But then when we were totally surrounded, I had to go back and get the other squad and bring them up. And as I brought them up, then we got ambushed. And next thing you know, from all that in the ground and the sand and everything, my M16 jammed. That was it. Now I'm in a hole in this like a little crater just off the beach. And I'm hearing him talking in Vietnamese. And you know, I cleaned, it's like a flintlock when it jams. So you have to break it down, you got to pull all the inners out, you got to put your ramrod together, then you got to shove that shell that's locked in the chamber, kick that out, and once that's out, then you have to put it all back together, and then lock it in, and then you have to put a magazine in and throw in another round, and you only get to shoot one round. It jams again. So I had to lay there, and I armed myself as best as I could, and had all these thoughts about, you know, someone's going to pop up. And, you know, I had my rifle, I had my bayonet on the rifle, I had my K-bar next to me in case I needed it, I had grenades next to me. And all I could think of is, you know, I'm going to die. I'm going to die here. I'm going to die. Made my peace with the Lord, you know. It's like, if it's my time, it's my time. But again, I was just one little hole hiding that kept my head down. They didn't know where I was, and you could hear them walking around me. And you know, it's just like scary than you can't even believe. So that battle was a constant threat to me, and feeling so vulnerable. Oh my God. If I had a pistol, I'd been great. I could have worked with the pistol.
You say in your memoir that, and I think you say it in the context of this battle, that you had resolved that you were not going to be taken prisoner. As you're laying there and you hear all of this going on, your rifle's jammed, you've got some weapons, but it's as you say, you know, you assumed it was over. I mean, had you concluded in your mind that if the NVA, you know, if they come to where I am, and if it looks like they're going to capture me, then they're not going to capture me?
I'll fight to the end. I'll fight to the very end. You know, they never had prisoners that were PFCs, and they could have had a lot of them. They just killed everybody. And they would torture to get any information they could from you, and then they would kill you. And I wasn't going to let that happen to me. I mean, I was going to have to, no matter what, they weren't going to capture me. I wasn't going to let them capture me. And I mean, we all talked about it and said, yeah, we can't let them. This is something we can never let them do is capture us.
You were just saying that the NVA will, if they capture you, you're likely to be executed anyway after being tortured. You described an incident where there's a Viet Cong prisoner who's a woman. And what is that? What is that story that you recount of the Viet Cong prisoner, the female Viet Cong prisoner?
Right. So I was running a patrol with just 3 other guys. So it was a fire team, and we were out looking around and ran across. As I was walking down this road, there was like trees. It was either a hill, trees, or something. And as I came around the bend, there was a hooch. I noticed the hooch coming into view, and there was 4 Vietnamese, and 2 were women and 2 were men, and I caught them dead, and they couldn't move. If they would have moved, I mean, they were that close, I would have killed them. They knew that, and so one of the women was the prettiest woman I think I'd ever seen in my life. She was gorgeous. I mean, she was so beautiful, and this whole time I'm going, all I've ever seen is old mama sons with black teeth and little children and old men. Here's this Viet Cong beautiful woman, and she's fighting for her country. And I'm going, we captured them. We tied their hands behind their backs, and we brought them in, and I gave them, I thought I was going to get an attaboy. I didn't even get an attaboy or anything. Just, all right, go get something to eat. And they took the prisoners and they set them. I was watching them in my hole because I was attracted to this woman, and I'm going, God, she's so beautiful. And I'm looking at her, and and she was very young. She was very young. I think she pretty close to maybe 17, 18, and just beautiful. I keep saying it because, you don't see that. And I'm eating my chow, and I'm noticing a conversation between this new guy who was watching them, and they were the Vietnamese, sit in this position that Vietnamese usually sit in, and she was trying to explain to him that she has to go to the bathroom, and he's kind of, I could see she was pointing, and she was like, she had her hands tied, and so what he did is he untied her hands and let her go in the bushes, and I'm going, what the hell's going on here? I'm watching, what the heck's going on? They all pee right in front of you. They pull up their black pajamas and they urinate right there in front of you. They don't care. I mean, to them, that's their bathroom. And she's going over into the bushes, and I started seeing her looking around, and she just had her pants off, and she started running, and she ran pretty much in front of me. And, there's other guys out there too. And I remember my M16 was all ready. All I had to do was grab it. And I remember pointing right at her. And I saw those cheeks of her butt going like this. And I couldn't shoot. I was just looking at those as they're going around. And yet behind there's Marines. I could have actually hit a Marine. I could have killed her probably. And she just vanished. And I had always felt guilty that I kind of let her escape. And she could be killing Americans again or something else. But this moral thing had hit me, and to see this young girl, she was, and her cheeks were just going up and down and running away from me. And I'm sure there's some people out there that would not be too happy to hear that I let an enemy escape, but I'm not sure that I could have hit somebody else. We had captured this Vietnamese woman, and there was like AK-47s. There was a Chinese machine gun. I mean, she had it all. She was definitely a zealot, hardcore. And I remember Sergeant Jones had tried to get her to talk, and she she just gave dirty looks, and she hated us. You could see she wanted to kill us. And I thought of me, I'll get this terrible person to talk. And so I just walked by Jones and grabbed the 45 out of his hand, and he was kind of shocked because you don't do that to an officer. I mean, a sergeant. And I did that, and I went right up to her, and I, had cocked the gun, and the trigger was back, and I pointed it at her head, and I'm in the, where are the VC, where the Viet Cong, and we had a phrase that we used, and I had it, and she's looking at me with this dirty look, and then she just spit in my face. Here I am. I remember starting to pull the trigger and said, no, this is not Bill Taylor. This is not right. This is not the right thing to do. And that was a very precious moment in my life, because I think that that haunting of me, that would have been haunting me for the rest of my life, just to kill somebody like that. Have a bullet, but you have to understand, we just lost a lot of our guys from snipers, from these people. This is the same village we would go through, and as soon as we go through it, they'd sniper us, someone would get wounded, so it was just like, then I realized, she was now going to be taken prisoner and sent to the rear, and she may have a fate worse than me killing her. We had just landed, and we're going to have to walk quite a few miles to get into our positions. And when we set up the positions, they weren't set up in the right situation. We had a new company commander. He didn't know what he was doing. He was from supply, we heard, and the guy had no idea how to set up perimeters and lines and stuff like that. And he had made me pull back from the line, from the edge of the hill that was coming up, and that meant that they could sneak up the hill and attack me. And I was terrified of that situation. And so, even though at this particular moment in time, I didn't know we were going to be overrun that night, I was always concerned, and I always had a nice parapet. I always camouflaged my hole. So when they did come, and they did come in massive numbers, I had like 15 hand grenades, and I threw them out in front of my hole, and they exploded. I mean, it was like a minefield in front of my hole. And I had killed every one of them that was in front of us. And so when the next morning came and I went down, there was bodies laying all over. And there was drag marks where they were dragging some of their bodies, or they had dragged off, they could get away. And so they sat there for 3 days while, and you watch the bodies start to puff up, and then you watch the maggots and the flies landing, and they start to smell putrid, and, it's out in front of my hole. So, it's like, oh gosh, I hope we move out of here pretty soon, because the bodies were pretty bad. And here comes this recon guy, and he had heard that I had dead bodies in front of my hole, but he said, I heard there's some dead bodies over here. And I go, yeah, they're right down there. And I thought he just wanted to look at them. Well, when he pulled out his knife and wanted to start cutting off their ears, I asked him what he was doing. He says, I'm taking their ears. And I go, no. The thing is, if you got a bunch of ears, those are the people that you killed. And with me at that time, those were the people that I killed. You're not entitled to desecrate them. Anyway, 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, they were being singled out because in previous battles, they had done that. They had cut off their ears. They had put ace of spades in their mouths and stuff like that. I didn't want that. I didn't want the beginning of that. I didn't want to start that. I'm a moral person. You leave the bodies alone. And so I just defended those guys. I was willing to shoot the guy. I mean, I had put a round in the chamber and everything, and had stood up over my hole and had pointed it at him. And I told him, "You leave my gooks alone. They're mine." And
Wow.
he called me dirty names and walked away. Then I went back in my hole and I thought, well, it's all about, I'm defending a dead person. It just, none of it made any sense to me. And it
Mm,
really made me feel like empty inside. Like
mm,
I'm in a crazy situation. I got to get out of here. The
yeah.
more I was there, the more I was kept on saying to myself, I got to get out of here. None of this stuff makes sense. And then I started questioning why we were there. And then, it's like these people are fighting so hard. They kept on sending more. And no matter how many we killed, they sent more and they sent more and they sent more. It just never ended. Again, it was, we're on a sweeping mission. You never know what's going to happen with a sweeping mission. And as we sweep, we entered an area that we passed through a village and there was a creek. And this creek, it was an amazing creek because there was reeds that were really heavy in the creek bed, and they came right to the top, and it camouflaged that whole, and it was off to my right and away, and it came down in front of me, and it would go off to the left and behind me, and so, and it was pretty big. It was like 6, 7 feet deep, and I thought, all we're doing is we're sweeping, going in the hole, and walking, and I don't know what it was. Maybe my experience. I was learning. I decided to check the hole out, and as I was checking the hole out, I found a little cave, and it turned out it was a baby wrapped in swaddling blankets, and I pulled it out and didn't know what to do with it. And we were on this push to get moving, and all of a sudden I stopped. The whole darn company couldn't move, and the other companies are sweeping, and we're stuck because of this baby, and I'm getting my butt chewed out. And they told me to bring the baby, just bring the baby, and we weren't going to get resupplied for like 3 days. What am I going to do with the baby? And going, let's put the baby back. And of course, I was told that you better listen to orders. They're told you to bring the baby. And I'm going, so there's a long story of how we all connected with the baby. My whole platoon would come over, and we all got a feeling of like being back home. And the baby wouldn't leave me. I was his dad, and I was going to protect that baby no matter what. But we could get hit with snipers, we could get hit with mortars, we could get overrun. I mean, who knows what could happen? And I've got a little baby. And I go through this thing and I fall in love with it. I get it laughing and sharing my experience with all these other Marines. And it gave us a sense of being home, a little baby. And, it's like so cute. And so it comes a time at the end when I have to give the baby up. And that's when I realized how much I hate the war and how I had to get out of that place. And I still had months to go.
So
And
in the end, then a helo comes and picks up the baby, and presumably the baby goes to an orphanage.
right. And I put my information. I said my home address, my phone number. I want to adopt this baby. I want I want to find a home for this kid. I fell in love with it. I'm single, 19 years old, and I'm writing this note, and I'm not paperclip, use a bobby pin that the corpsman had given me, and not a bobby pin, safety pin. And I had said I wanted it, and then the baby wouldn't let me go. I mean, the chopper's blades are spinning, and I'm holding the baby, And I'm not sure if I'm holding the baby from him. The baby was grabbing onto me, and this Marine was saying, "Let go of the baby." And it's like we're fighting over the baby. And then all of a sudden, he was just ripped from my arms. And this tears were just. This is the only story that gets me now. I gotta tell you, all of them don't get me. This one gets me. So yeah, it just, they ripped it, and then I'm trying to watch the baby, and the blades of the chopper were taken off, and I got lower and trying to get away as this, and when I got away and I wiped all of the dirt out of my eyes and I'm looking up, I could see this Marine hanging onto the chopper and hanging onto the baby, and it just kind of drifted off into the distance.